So there's a certain thinking style that I think League really promotes that no other esport really in the world does. And I think it has to do with the weightings that it puts on its decision making, and specifically the means in which you can do it. This can relate to decisions as big as like choosing where to invest your time and like promoting your mastery, or as small as like things that you can do on an every game basis or every minute basis, right? Where you can choose how to play your trades, what items to buy, what runes to set up, how you go about that, or just deciding the way and means in which you express your mechanics, right? And I think League teaches us this concept extremely well because it's very unique in that both of the metrics that I'm going to talk about need to be considered heavily and basically every single major decision you make within the game, and in a genuine state of like balance and equilibrium that I would say not really many other games in my life seem to accomplish and scratch that itch for. I'd almost call it like a beautiful dance between that. And the way I'd like to describe it is that within any decision within League of Legends, no matter like what it is, how big, at what point, right? There's generally two metrics in which it can really hinge on. I think a lot of other games maybe try, or like they say they can also kind of emphasize this, but I think League does it in a way that's like really, really rewarding and has that insane level of balance that I don't really see in many other games. So the first one is how well you can execute any given decision depending on what choice you make. And the second one is how close that decision was to being the right decision in the first place. And both of these dimensions are incredibly important to any situation within a League game and within your overall career within League. And I think this balance between these two aspects is so well tied into its gameplay, and people don't really realize this. I actually think this balance is a hallmark indicator of good game design, especially in esports titles, and I think there's a lot we can learn from it, especially in League of Legends. Understandably, League can cause a lot of frustration in players with some of the situations that it places us through, right? And understanding this concept can not only reduce that frustration significantly, in my opinion, and I believe that understanding this concept can not only reduce that frustration significantly, if not entirely in many of these scenarios, I think it can also kind of like enhance your understanding and decision making in the future as well. While on the surface, these situations seem unpleasant or even unplayable and really just it leaves you with a really gross feeling at times. I'm not going to lie. But if you have the means to really think further than that and really understand like why did the situation happen? How can I balance both of these metrics to kind of understand better like why this stimulus came to me, right? And looking beyond that and seeing like, hey, you know, yes, it sucks, but like, why did it suck, right? We can't control the situation that happened per se, only to an extent, but we can control how we react to it, and we can control how we think about it in order to understand how to improve in the future. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about it for League, and this is something that I've actually genuinely used in a lot of scenarios. And because I picked it up from League, I was able to kind of apply it to a lot of different areas within my life. And I think that is something that I think and that I believe, and I should encourage you guys to also try to kind of emphasize within yourselves. I'm going to give a couple of examples of in-game, and I'm also wanting to give some examples of how this kind of transposes to your real life. So let's say you're in a situation where you're fucked no matter what, right? And the off the dome, the first thing that comes to mind is probably top lane, because that's probably the role that's most conducive to a lot of these kind of funny scenarios, right? So let's say, you know, the enemy laner is building a slow push and you can't really answer due to the matchup. Let's say you just can't really touch the wave, right? There's going to be situations like that, right? And when the enemy's building slow push, and it creates an obvious dive opportunity for the enemy. So what ends up happening is that you end up having to fight for your life on an eventual potential dive scenario. Let's say in cases where enemy jungler is moving up and enemy mid lane is moving up too, right? Or you give up the wave, right? And both situations are obviously really bad, and no matter how well you're going to play in the situation, let's say mechanically, in terms of a micro level, you're probably screwed, right? So, and this causes a lot of frustration for a lot of players. You're like, what can I do, bro? This is like this situation's unplayable. I am just fucked, right? Like I choose between two shitty options. This is an example where I'm like, hey, you know, I totally get it. Like this looks like ass on the surface, but if you like kind of like dig deeper into that, you know, almost dig deeper into that ass, right? And you see like, oh, what if like a lot of times the situation in the fix is like you actually it's more preventative, right? And that's why I'm trying to emphasize both of these metrics here, both of these dimensions. This is the case where the second dimension is probably more relevant. The one where it focuses on whether the decision you made was the right decision in the first place, right? So in this case, I would seek to pique your curiosity on preventative measures in order to prevent the situation from happening in the first place, right? So let's say, for example, you're like, well, choosing between fighting your life on the wave and probably dying. and or giving up the wave, right? Those are the two options. What about the forbidden third option, in which case you detect the situation coming in the first place because of the matchup and because of the way the wave is going? You can escalate your agency earlier in order to kind of understand what you can do beforehand, right? So this can mean going for a more ambitious trade early on, just to either improve your conditions and or make the enemy conditions worse to prevent the dive from happening, or you can even trade such that you are playing for the wave, so that after the trade you can actually thin out the wave a little bit, right? Or you could trade like a psychopath and then take your battles early and then just lose your conditions early, and then once you determine that like the situation is no longer playable, then you can just cut your losses there and then play it off early. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, right? That's the kind of the frame of mind that I just want to get you guys thinking through. So another one is where, let's say there's a matchup. The matchup itself is unplayable. Let's say, for example, the first matchup that comes to mind for me is, let's say, Camille and Darius, right? That's probably Camille's worst matchup. Contrary to belief, it's actually a lot worse than Jax. A lot of top Camille players, they do think there's a lot of skill expression into the Jax matchup, and it's kind of fun. That's besides the point, right? So let's say the Camille could play absolutely out of her mind, right? And the Camille player could try to outplay this matchup. But let's say, what if you just played a different champ? Could you have made another decision in terms of preparation in order to better equip yourself the next time, instead of having to just say or kind of defer to improving on your technical capability, right? Because sometimes, yes, it's cool to say that, yeah, I could have played this matchup better, I could have played it on this wave, right? But obviously, we are just humans, and League is a game that pushes the capabilities of the human mind to their absolute limit, let's say. And is it really productive all the time to just say, yeah, my hands could have been better here, right? There's also other metrics and other dimensions of the mind in which you can kind of tap into when it comes to learning about League and the situations and what you can access in terms of like your mind of thinking in order to improve. So in this case, you could pick a different champ. If you blinded Camille and you got counterpicked, what runes could I take? How can I adjust my items, right? Could I go second wind D shield in order to kind of like mitigate this damage? Obviously, it's gonna be painful, but is there a level of agency that we can do and introduce into the game that we can get really creative about in order to kind of come up with solutions? And I think as a result of this, you're gonna have a lot more fun with the game too, right? You're gonna really, whenever you get that, you make that sort of decision and you find it bear fruit, it's going to be so lovely, right? And I think it's very satisfying when your line of thinking is rewarded in that sense, right? So I can give some obvious examples of these adjustments, and it can help justify why other players would make these adjustments in certain matchups. So like enchanters going for guardian in certain like aggressive matchups is an obvious example. They can also adjust their itemization. Think of things like Comet Aatrox, right? You're like, wait a second, I've only gone it doesn't sound that intuitive, but let's say, for example, in certain matchups, I believe Aatrox and Sonar, sometimes they end up actually going Comet because of the way the matchup tends to flow out. And because of that, they end up switching it up. Think of like Jace runes too, right? Like Jace players will actually adjust their runes quite a bit based on the matchup, right? Some of the matchups constitute Conqueror, some of them constitute a Phase Rush build, right? Or some of them I've even seen some crazy stuff with First Strike, and depending on whether it's not in the meta or not, right? It really is contingent on that, and I do think that it's very rewarding to be able to think about that. And for the players that do think about that in like whatever dimension and whatever area of the game that they choose to, I think there's a lot of areas in which you can kind of get that cash out. So I think this is also fundamentally the reason for the importance of things like draft, rune selection, itemization decisions to manipulate waves even. And I think this is also why it's a pet peeve of mine that when people just simply like Google their item builds and like their runes and stuff, like this is a beautiful, genuinely beautiful, engaging part of the game that you just are basically opting out of, and you're just choosing not to really like allow yourself to think and express in that metric. Of course, like if you're not comfortable in these decisions and you just rather have other things to focus on, and you're just okay with just like sacking that part of like optimization, not necessarily optimization, creativity, I would say, and I think that's totally okay. But I think if you have the chance, I really do think thinking about this more is really awesome, and I think it really allows you to lean into the nuance and the beauty of the game more. And I think it feels incredibly rewarding when a preparation-based decision you make ends up paying off. I'd also like to emphasize the inverse of it and how important that is as well. I think there are some players out there, like myself actually, that need to hear the other side more. So sometimes you hear the Korean advice, right? It's often like, yo, just play better, right? Lamau, right? And I was talking about like how some people do that too much and they just use it as a cop-out answer, right? But sometimes there's people on the other side, and I am one of these people, where, we have to validate the other side, because like genuinely, if you're not maximizing or encouraging the little micro interactions, and the way you're even clicking, and the way you're positioning your cursor, and how you're positioning your keyboard and your fingers, and what little intricacies of like champion abilities that they're revealing that you can take advantage on, and little hallmark moments like that, this is a huge opportunity for improvement. And I think this is a whole nother lens to consider. I would usually, before focus on the fundamentals, as they say, and I think I would end up not prioritizing the curiosity and the skepticism of my own mechanical play in order to consider what to improve. And this is why I'm also emphasizing that this metric is equally, if not more important. And this is where a lot of the fruit of your skill expression kind of comes to fruition. Instead of just using it as this blanket term and just saying just play better, I think you can think about the balance of these two dimensions and really explore both angles in your gameplay, and from whatever lens is relevant to that situation. And I think it can enhance any situation you make in the game. So how do we tie this into real life? I have some examples of where this is probably the same thing, right? So let's talk first with like your partner, right? Let's say you can try your absolute hardest to be a good partner. So how can we tie this into real life? I think this is actually very relevant to real life, because as you would imagine, in life, it's not always like fair either. And like there's a lot of situations where you're like, I work so hard, but like why didn't I get this payoff? Like why didn't this work out for me? Well, did you make the right decision? Or like, I feel like I'm making all the right moves, Quatch, but like it's not paying off. I'm going to the gym, my diet's on lock. Is it? Are you going hard enough at the gym? That's like a light example, right? I've got other examples of where this could probably be very relevant. So like, let's say your decision with a partner. You can try your absolute hardest to be a good partner. You go the extra mile. You make sure to over communicate. Not even over communicate. You make sure to meet your partner's needs. Like very specifically, you do everything you can that you would like to be treated, and then some. And maybe you feel like there's strife in your relationship, and you believe in that internal locus, and you try even harder, do more for them. But I think sometimes there's maturity in realizing that and learning that what it takes is also relevant to finding the right partner in the first place, right? The one that's the best fit for your needs, and the one that you're looking for, and what you think would make you happiest in life, right? So let's say no matter how good of a partner you were to a person and how hard you tried, that's not really that relevant if that partner was not the right one for you. And that is something that we have to validate and understand. There's no really helping it if, that partner was not the right one for you. There's going to be nuance to every situation, and people have different personality styles, right? We of course have to account for that. But, for those people that have made it work with that, like, I applaud you. I think that's beautiful. I think that's great. But I think this example is meant to really emphasize that like both metrics are equally important, right? The inverse is true. Maybe you gave up. Maybe some of you have given up and let someone go that's like you thought was really good to you, but you just kind of like took it for granted, and you just didn't try hard enough in that relationship. And this could be an area of regret, or this was a time of growth for you, or this was a bad time in your life, right? It could have been quote unquote the right decision, but you executed upon it quite poorly, and then you got punished for it. And I think that's totally reasonable. I think this is kind of similar with friendships, right? I think you can be as good of a friend as possible, but if you just don't see eye to eye, the same sort of issue can arise. You also got to choose the right friends, right? Like sometimes you can make the right moves, but if they're just kind of a dick, like, this could be a consideration for like maybe finding new friends, right? And it's hard because like sometimes you're like latched into a friend group, or, this is all you got and stuff like that. But like, if that's the case, right, we might have to kind of understand that and really go the extra mile to kind of like be preventative and push ourselves to really find a group of people that really do value us and match the things that we really see in life and how we want to live our lives, right? Career is another one. I've met many people that are very talented and very smart, grinding towards their career. But no matter how hard they tried or how many accolades they got in that career, I've seen so much talent firsthand go to waste because it's gone into the wrong career. Maybe one that's less lucrative. Maybe one that is something that they don't really care about. Maybe it's both of those, right? No matter what, like I think they were screwed because it was fundamentally the wrong decision for them. And your level of execution and your level of talent in this decision is technically irrelevant, because what matters is whether it was the right decision. And if no matter what, if it was the wrong decision, then it doesn't really matter, right? Like, you could work max effort and you could be the faker of McDonald's burger flipping, right? But fundamentally, you still work at McDonald's. Is that the right decision for you? Maybe there is someone in the world or someone that's watching that in this case it actually is, and I applaud you for it. But conventionally speaking, a lot of people, I would imagine, would not want to be McDonald's as an end game job. Although being the faker of McDonald's sounds kind of sick. I think a common quote that encapsulates this level of thinking is the concept of working smart versus working hard. You definitely need both in order to succeed in almost anything. And I think League does an excellent job of kind of emphasizing this focus of both dimensions in order to succeed. And I think hopefully with these examples in this line of thinking, I want to get that point across basically, so you can kind of apply this kind of thinking, not only in League itself, but in whatever you do. And I think this is one of the many things that the beauty of League kind of transposes into our lives and kind of helps frame our minds. And that was basically what I want to do for you today, right? This is genuinely something that I actually use a lot. This framework of thinking is something I actually constantly rely on. And it is genuinely thanks to League that I was able to pick this up and kind of apply this and improve my way of thinking and enhance all my interactions within my life, the way I approach certain situations, the way I approach and fix problems, and the way I kind of like understand myself and how I can understand my own emotions. So hopefully you're able to extract something similar from that, and I hope there's some value to gain from that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys have a good one though. So yeah, see ya.